Let's talk about all things hems. It seems like hems are a boring subject, but when you think about lengthening or straightening or shortening a hem, there's really more to hems than meet the eye. The purpose of a hem is to keep the fabric of the dress from unraveling and keeping the dress looking nice and tidy. There's a few tools that I would hate to be without when it comes to hems, and one is my skirt marker. You can pick these up at the thrift sometimes. You can find them on eBay. You can actually buy them new. I prefer the kind where the pin will pierce the fabric as opposed to the chalk marking the fabric. I also use lace tape almost exclusively. It's very easy to hand stitch through. You can get hem tape, which is solid. You can use anything really that doesn't unravel, like grosgrain ribbon or other ribbon. And if you're doing a circle skirt, you can use bias tape. And bias tape, it's made on the bias, so it stretches. If you've ever turned up a circle skirt and tried to make a hem and it's all been wrinkled and overlapping, bias tape will prevent that from happening. I've also straightened hems with steam. If you have a rayon crepe dress or a rayon dress and the hem is uneven and you know that you're going to have to shorten it considerably to make it even, definitely try steam first. I don't know how many dresses I have saved by steaming the hem straight as opposed to just cutting it off. It's always something to try first before you cut. You can't replace that fabric, trust me. So these techniques are not new. I'm sure you can find anything that I'm going to go over on the internet and better done by other people than me. But as they pertain to vintage, sometimes they're a little harder to find. And the purpose of me talking about hems at all and showing you some techniques is in case you have a dress that you don't know what to do with and it's just lying at the bottom of your closet. Hopefully I'll give you some inspiration to try these techniques. A couple things to go over before I get into how to use a skirt marker. I don't currently have any dresses that need the hem straightened. Most of my vintage is still packed, but shortening or straightening a hem is virtually the same technique. You'll need your dress on a dress form or on a human, and you'll need to let the hem down. I've tried to be lazy about this, but it just saves headaches in the long run. And I've never been able to shorten a hem without it being on a body or on a dress form. It's just very difficult. I have tried to measure from the waist down to where I want the hem to end, and just I just cut more off, and it got shorter and shorter. You can't really account for the bust and the butt when you're doing a flat lay and trying to keep it straight. You want to start at the shortest point if you're straightening the hem and go from there. About my hem marker, mine is missing a part. I thrifted this and it doesn't have the third leg for the base, so I have to be very careful to keep it perpendicular to the floor. So you could use a ruler also, but again, just be careful of how you tip it when you're measuring. And a ruler doesn't have the fancy pin feature. So how this works is the fabric gets crimped in the skirt marker and allows you to pass a pin through, and when you take the skirt marker away, the pin stays in the fabric. So the dress is on the form and the hem is out, and I have my skirt marker placed on the floor, and I have found my shortest point. So if this is my shortest point, I adjust my skirt marker to put the pin in at that very lowest part of the hem, and close the skirt marker, insert my first pin, take the skirt marker away, and the pin is there at the hem. The skirt marker is the constant. It's the same height from the floor to the pin insertion point, so that pin line becomes your straight line. Continue marking your skirt all the way around the entire hemline. Hem is pretty straight already, but that is how you would straighten the hemline. If you wanted to shorten it, let's say you wanted to shorten it a couple of inches, you adjust your skirt marker to the point you want to shorten it to and mark your skirt all the way around. So let's say you want to shorten this hem and the pin line is where you want the final hem to lay. You certainly don't want to cut at the pin line. You want to make sure you have a decent hem allowance, at least an inch, maybe 3 inches, so you can turn it up twice or use the hem tape. When it comes to vintage dresses, it really depends on whether or not it's yours for the long haul or that you might pass it on. Me as a vintage seller, if I was to shorten this dress for someone, I would want to leave the original length and just turn it up so that in the future someone could let that length back down. Assuming that you've cut your dress with a nice straight line, you want to turn your dress inside out. Now it's time to discuss hemming options. Since a hem is just a way to keep the fabric from unraveling, all you have to do is zigzag this raw edge and turn it up once. Or you can turn it up twice and tack, and that will prevent it from fraying. And this fold can be as big or as little as you want it to be. If you are trying to get the most length for a skirt, you'll want to use hem facing. This is attached to the front of the dress along the edge, and when it is folded in, not only is it a nice finished look, but you'll use just a minute portion of that final length. So I have the lace on the right side of the dress. You can see the interior seam here, and I'm just going to stitch very close to the edge. So the lace tape is applied to the raw edge of the dress, very close along the hem to the front side, and when you flip it over, the interior will have a nice and tidy look to it, and of course the front side will also look good. And I just hand stitch along that edge of that lace. I've ironed and pinned the tape right on that stitch line almost. So I took about 1/8 of an inch seam allowance and then turned it up right along where I stitched. So that's the least amount possible of fabric that you can use and still make a hem. Now it's time to tack the other side of the tape. I use Invisifil thread because it's super fine, and a fine needle, and I secure my thread usually along the seam where there's double layer of fabric, and I do a whip stitch, just taking a little bit of the dress and a little bit of that tape, and I go about 1/2 inch per stitch, and even though there might be a lot of skirt, it goes pretty quick. Let's say your dress is too short and you're considering taking the hem down. There's a few things to think about. The dress has been exposed to sunlight and wear a lot longer than the hem and may be much more faded than the hem, so you're going to have to think about whether or not you're willing to live with that. Plus the crease, this particular dress has been folded up twice, so there's going to be 2 crease lines and they may never be able to be steamed out. Plus, a lot of fabrics have will show perforations where the previous stitches are, and they will never go away. I think most of us in the vintage community are willing to live with some flaws, especially if the dress can be brought back to the proper length for the era. But these are all considerations prior to trying to let the hem down. I have a cold rayon dress on the dress form. I'm going to show you the technique that I use to straighten up a hem using the steamer and water in a spray bottle. I've done this with all different types of rayon, rayon crepe, cold rayon, woven rayon. I've also done it with like wool crepe or like a jersey. Definitely worth a try for any type of fabrics, anything cut on the bias, because you might be able to save shortening a dress with this technique. This particular dress doesn't have a very uneven hem, but you'll understand the technique that I use. I want to go over the spray bottle first of all. Of course, water and fabric don't always mix well. I have had to fix water spots after I've straightened a hem. So this is not the super easiest technique. It requires a lot of patience. Sometimes it's taking me like 3 days, going back over and letting the dress dry and steaming it a little bit, stretching it to get the hem straight. But I do feel, rather than cutting it off, it's better to try and get the length back to where it should be. Because even if you cut it off, the fabric itself, it's prone to warping. You wash it again and you're just going to have to go through that same process again, so you might as well leave as much fabric as possible. So if you're looking at the dress and you see something, a spot that is too long, I hit it with water in a spray bottle, and that will make, you can see this dress is already shrinking a little bit, and that seam is getting puckered. You might have to do this a couple of times, let it dry, or soak it. This one just actually took a light hit with the water. And if you want to lengthen a section, I put the steamer underneath and pull down. So again, I put the steamer underneath and gently pull with the head of the steamer and or my hands, depending on how much length I think I can get out. Another thing you want to be aware of is having the dress very where it should be on the dress form. You don't want the shoulders forward or back. You want that waistline to be nice and even all the way around. Another thing I've done too to prevent water spots, you know, like I said, if I wanted to, actually this section needs to be brought up a little bit. So if I was doing water and wanted to shorten that, and the dress was very prone to water spotting, or I really was impatient to wait for it to dry, I would hit it with a blow dryer. That really prevents water spots if you can get it dried fast enough, especially around the outside edges. So that's the technique. It's not very fast, it's not very easy. You have to have a lot of patience, but definitely worth trying.